Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Mike Moyle, District 14. This year, we've talked a lot about property taxes, and you've seen a lot of bills and RSs and discussion on what's right and what's wrong and how to do it. It's been an issue we've talked about now for the last several years. You saw last year where this committee kicked out a freeze, which would have provided substantial property tax relief. The Senate turned it into a 4% cap and then substantially killed it. You saw last year this body kicked out an increase in the homeowners exemption, with the cost of that increase coming out of the new construction at 3%, which would have provided tax relief instead of a tax shift. The Senate killed that one. This year we've had discussions on a lot of issues, and you've seen them in and out, but we're getting to the end and we need to do something. I think that eventually property taxes and the problem with property taxes in the state of Idaho are going to be solved with the voter initiative. It's how they did it with the homeowners exemption. That's how they did it with the 1% initiative in 78, I believe. But in the meantime, we've got to do something to slow down the pain that's going on and the shift that's going on and the burden of property taxes on Idaho citizens. So for the last 3 weeks, we've taken ideas similar to Representative Skog's, ideas from other members of this committee, ideas from Farm Bureau, ideas from the Association of Cities. In fact, I want to thank the Association of Counties for their help on this. Seth has been a stalwart in helping try to find a path forward. The counties have been very instrumental in finding a path where we could get an agreement, at least on this language. This is not the end of the property tax issue. This will help solve some of the problems. It'll help slow down some of the shift, but it also is not the end. We still have more to resolve. Remember this, there's only two ways to lower your property taxes. One is to shift, and the other is to constrain the budgets. This does a little bit of both. So let's talk about what this bill does. First off, it raises the homeowner's exemption 25% to $125,000. It increases the circuit breaker to $1,500. The same for the disabled vets. They go up to $1,500. In 2022, it will change the way the circuit breaker is done and who can qualify for it by saying that if you're over 125% of the median, you have the option to go on the deferral program, but not on the circuit breaker. And hopefully by doing that next year, we can increase it again, because what's happening now is you have homes that are worth a lot of money, some in the millions, that are taking benefit or advantage of the circuit breaker. And I don't think that that's what that was ever intended for this with the circuit breaker. The next thing it does in 2022, it increases the exemption on personal property tax. You've seen all this propaganda about how it does away with the property tax, personal property tax. It does not. It increases the exemption from $100,000 to $250,000, and it does eliminate the transient personal property. That's the stuff that goes from county to county. It's hard to track. Sometimes people lie about what county it's in and where it's at. It just says we're not going to worry about that anymore. Those are the issues on the property tax side that provide some property tax relief there. It also reduces the It also says that budgets are capped at 8%. That doesn't affect very many. There's a few that it'll affect. But it caps the total growth at 8%. There is one exemption on that, and that is if urban renewal district dissolves, it allows that 80% of that urban renewal district to come back in above that cap. But it caps it at 8%. Very few people are affected by that. It's generally the high growing areas, generally the areas that have the problem, the issue with property taxes too, by the way. It reduces the amount of foregone money that a taxing district can take. Currently, some taxing districts can take the full amount of foregone, and sometimes that foregone is a substantial amount. You saw that last year with like Bonneville County, Ada County, and others. This limits them to 1% of ongoing, but it also allows them to take one time 3% and use it for a capital purchase. So if Representative Gestrin's county decides they want to build a new courthouse, they can take that one time, but then it comes back out, which will provide property tax relief when it comes back out. One of the things that our friends at the Farm Bureau were really concerned about, and also came up with Canyon County and Representative Skog, was the issue of changing classification. This bill changes it and says that that does not go on the new construction roll until improvements are made. That is a huge deal. Canyon County, that's probably 20%. That's a big deal. And that will help reduce property taxes going forward until there's something built there that would take up the burden of that and not shift to others. With that, Mr. Chairman, it's a start. We've got a long ways to go with property taxes, but it gets us down the road of slowing down the pain. Eventually, we're going to have to address the issue of the budgets. In my opinion, you can only shift it so much. But this is a good start. This will help the taxpayers, and I hope that you can support it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Representative Moyle? Representative Kaufman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you go over that last bullet point that you hit again and explain that one more time?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative, sometimes property, your farm, a developer may buy it. And immediately the assessor says it's now development land. Nothing's changed, but he raises the value. So instead of going from ag, it goes up to whatever. Then you say, no, we're still farming. It goes back down in a year or two. But that change in value goes on the new construction rule, that change in classification. This prevents that from happening until we start building the improvements. I would assume if this bill passes, there'll be more discussion on that next year. It's been an issue we addressed a little bit in regards to the developer's discount, but we haven't done it in other areas. Friend in Northern Idaho had a piece of ground he brought, timbered land. Immediately, the assessor puts it on the change in classification rolls, development land. A year later, he gets it back to timberland. The budget didn't go down, so he paid an extra $20,000 or $30,000 in taxes. That goes in their budget. His value goes back down. The rest of you paid it. It's helped solve that problem.
Representative Necochea.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. During the interim committee, we had a lot of fun during the interim committee on property taxes.
That was torture.
And anyway, we talked a little bit about raising the homeowners exemption, but you would always come back with that's just going to shift to those lower value properties. Now, one way to mediate that is to let people take 55% of the maximum value rather than 50%. It doesn't look like that is in here. Did you consider that? And do you have any analysis of what the impact could be on those lower value properties?
Representative Moyle.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, yes, we talked about it. There was pushback from a lot at the table. And again, I would remind you, this is a starting point. We will be looking at that again next year. The problem with the homeowner's exemption, though, in a lot of places, you can raise it, you can do the bottom end more, but it's still nobody to pay the tax. Some of these districts don't have the commercial or the ag or the industrial to shift it to. That's the problem with the homeowner exemption. A lot of people are going to think since we raised this 25%, that they're going to see a lot of relief. Some will see a lot of relief and some won't see any because it's going to fall back on the unprotected portion of their property because there's no one to shift it to. That's the whole issue with the homeowner's exemption. You've got to have somebody to shift it to pay the bill because you're making somebody else pay the bill, not you, but the other guy. When you have areas with not a whole lot of commercial or ag or timber or somewhere else to shift it to, it falls back on the homeowners. And I think, and I want to make it clear, there are some people that are thinking they got 25% is a huge increase in the homeowners exemption, way more than we've supported in the past. And they think they're going to get a big reduction. Some will and some won't, depending on if there's somebody else to shift it to. That's the problem with the homeowners exemption. And we talked about that in the committee and how to address that. Ultimately, in my personal opinion, the problem still relies back on the locals. You're being asked to make decisions on how to shift this. All the property tax decisions are made at the local level. Let me say that again. Those budgets are your local guys that you put in there. Not the legislature. The legislature can make these parameters, which this does. We can direct how you do it. But ultimately, it comes down to your city councils, your fire districts, your cemetery districts, your county commissioners. They're the ones that make these decisions. You voted them in there. And so I encourage you, if you're listening to what I say today, your locals have control. They don't have to take the full 3%. They don't have to take the new construction. They don't have to take the foregone like Ada and Bonneville and others. They don't have to do that. But when they do that, it raises your taxes. You saw last year, the freeze bill, how many districts, we spent 3 days and listened to every county commissioner and every city manager and every assessor in this state for 3 days tell us how a freeze would never work. And then COVID came along and a whole bunch of them did what? They froze it. Property taxes statewide were actually down a little over 5% last year. They could have raised them more than that, about 5, but they cut them. Why? Because everything they said they couldn't do, those that were responsible enough did. Some didn't, but some did because they saw the need and the urgency in regards to how it was affecting our citizens. So again, the locals have control. This is just setting guidelines and shifting things a little bit.
Representative Gestrin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Moyle, when it comes to delaying the increase in property because it's being developed, let's say this new building's being built, it's not going to go on until it's complete. Is that what I understood you to say? And also, is that going to solve the problem of upon its completion and it's actually a nonprofit that it'll never go on the tax roll to raise the budgets?
Representative Moyle.
Mr. Chairman, the issue with nonprofits, churches, for example, we adjusted a few years ago because what was happening, and I'll use there was a church is being built. I won't name a denomination. The church is being built, and it takes them a few years to build the church. Well, the first year, the value goes up, say, 10 million. The next year, they work on it, it goes up 20 million. The next year, it goes up 30 million. The fourth year, they occupy the building, and it's exempt. And it shifts to everybody else. We took care of that a couple of years ago. The issue on the other side of the improvements on new construction we're dealing with is when they're building that project, there's no need for services. They're building it. There's nothing there. And that's kind of a phony deal because there's nothing there and it's shifting to everybody else. This fixes that and says, you get the new construction component, but you're going to go have something built there. It's going to change. It's really going to change in its use. The use is going to change to where it's really not timberland. It's really a subdivision. That's the issue there. So we don't shift it to existing taxpayers later when they move it around.
Thank you. Are there further questions? I'm not seeing any. Thank you. Representative Chan.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Moyle, could you dig into a little bit the changes in the circuit breaker eligibility? It looks like that is it attempted to make it a wash so that you increase assistance a little bit, but you pay for it by the people who get eliminated from the program. Is that correct?
Representative Moyle.
Mr. Chairman, in the first year, no. The first year, the state general fund will pick it up. So this year, the state general fund will pick it up. There's an issue in regards to some of the taxing districts, and some of our friends on the Senate had some concerns. So we pay for it all this year. The second year, next year, then it's 125% of median. So for a long time, you've heard us talk about doing some kind of an asset test on circuit breaker. It makes no sense for the taxpayers in the state of Idaho to subsidize a $2 million home, for example. If you got a $2 million home, in my opinion, you should probably pay your own property taxes and not require those on the other end to use their sales tax revenues that could go to schools or income tax revenue that could go to schools to subsidize their homes. So what we do in the next year, not this year, but the following year, is raise that to 125, which will pay for the increase on the bottom end. I'm hoping that it's big enough that we can increase the circuit breaker again next year, but we won't know till we see how that works out. It was a way to do basically an asset test without trying to define each asset or what the boundary was in each county. So it was just easier to say the median, 125% of median. They say it's about 15% of those who receive the circuit breaker.
Thank you. Are there further questions? Thank you, Representative Moyle.
Thank you.
So we do have 2 online, so we can take care of those first. We want to get them queued up for us. We will take Deborah Kling first. And when you can hear us, let us know if we can hear you. Shout out and we'll get you going. We're going to give our testifiers about 3 minutes each, so please plan accordingly.
Thank you.
Hi, Deborah.
And good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay. First of all, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to get to speak today, and thank you for your service. Thank you to this entire committee for the work that you do. It's greatly appreciated. I would like to, I'll try to be very brief. I want to talk about process, but more than anything today, and just respond to a couple comments. And the first one was, we need to do something. Correct? We need to do something. But that something, I think that is really important, has to do with a bill, which is the homeowner's exemption. Last year, as I said in the meetings here with this committee, the homeowner's exemption bill was not allowed to be brought forward. I know this year Representative Skog has a bill that was put together by a lot of citizens that came forward with a request for the bill. And again, it hasn't been brought forward. I think the amount that is referenced in Representative Skog's bill is the amount that it needs to be. When we talk about a meaningful tax relief and we talk about this shift, I would just like to remind this committee that the legislature actually limited the homeowners exemption back in 2016, and that has been a huge impetus to the shift that has taken place that has caused the increased valuation of homes and the tax burden to become unbearable to our citizens. The other thing I'd like to mention in reference to subsidizing homeowners with the circuit breaker, those that have, and it's in the bill, and I'm sorry, I just got a copy of this, so it's hard to actually know where in the bill it is, but it was referencing those homes that have increased in values and not allowing us to subsidize those. Well, one thing I would say is that we're going to push elderly people out of their homes because their incomes, and I can think of people that have farmed for years, and I know of some, that the value of their home has increased tremendously, but their income is now on Social Security. And it's not their fault, but you're telling them they have to leave their home in order to survive, which means we're pushing people out of their homes. Very unfortunate. The thing I want to spend most of my time on is the process. So the process that we have just gone through is very concerning to me because cities across the state, via a statute, are not allowed to, one, schedule meetings without 48-hour notice or a special meeting 24-hour notice. And yet the process here, we're also not allowed to have serial meetings. Yet our legislators are allowed to sit in back rooms, have discussions, come out and bypass a process that at the city level would never be allowed to function. And I just think that this is such an important topic. It's been held to the very end. It hasn't moved forward. Yes, there has been a lot of discussion, and yes, we're accused of not coming to the table. But just because we don't like what someone's saying doesn't mean we're not at the table as far as cities go. The city of Nampa has $6 million that we set aside and we never charged our citizens. And we've been good fiscal stewards, yet I feel like we're being penalized. And I just want to say that sometimes the process is as important as anything. And when you said we don't have to take new construction, we have to provide service, which costs. So I know I'm out of time. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next we have Rick Hagenboom. And again, if you give us your name and who you represent, and we'll give you some time. So when you're there, go ahead and shout out to us, and we'll verify that we can hear you.
Hey, good afternoon, Chairman and Committee.
Hi, how are you? We can hear you fine.
I'm doing okay. I do, Rick Hogenboom, 1924 West Honeydew Drive, resident of Nampa. I do, just for disclosure, do work in the mayor's office as chief of staff, was also a former council member here in the city of Nampa. And also for full disclosure, the fire chief is trying to call and he is heading down to testify, but I told him that your meeting had already started because I know that the time had kind of got adjusted. So I do know that our fire chief, Kirk Carpenter, just on his behalf, want to briefly express his concern about this bill and his inability to potentially get there in time to testify, which also kind of speaks to the process. I know you guys are trying to get home. You guys are trying to pack a lot of business in this week, but unfortunately, I think the public input and vetting on bills for those whom it's going to impact, it can move rather rapidly, whereas, as Mayor Kling mentioned, at the city level, even a variance on a shed in a backyard requires a public hearing and notice and procedures, and what you're contemplating has far more serious impact on the taxpayers. I do just want to speak to one issue that's happened. There has been a shift. I know that as you contemplate what's equitable, some of the largest taxpayers in the city of Nampa and Canyon County have seen a tax reduction over the last 5 years, including the likes of Walmart. And that's not to demonize Walmart. I shop at Walmart, appreciate the good bargains that you can find there on occasion. But they have seen a property tax decrease, where someone like my dad, who's a Vietnam vet on a fixed income, retired, lives here in Nampa, has seen a tax increase. And he asked me, son, what's going on? And this was when I was on city council. How come my property taxes are going up? Is it because your budgets are going up 25%? And I show my dad and explain to him that his tax increases are really funding the tax decreases of the likes of Walmart. And obviously, my dad's like, son, what can you do about it? I said, very little. All we can control is the budget. And as Mayor Kling mentioned, the city of Nampa has been very fiscally prudent. I know Representative Skog has been mentioned. He's a former council member in Nampa. And, we lead the state in the accumulated foregone and what has been disclaimed. Our taxpayers are paying $6 million less a year in annual budget because that's budget capacity the city of Nampa is not taken. So when I explain that to my dad, and he wonders why his taxes are going up 30%, it's because the assessed value of his home is going up. And now with the circuit breaker, it looks like you're being more generous to someone like my dad, but his home, through no fault of his own, might be worth right at that 125% of the median home value. And whereas he might have qualified last year, he won't qualify next year. And certainly I agree with Representative Moyle, a home worth $2 million, you certainly don't want to subsidize that with an asset test. But I think that there are people who are sitting right at that margin, or homes moved right at that 125%. They're in for a rude awakening next year when they realize that they don't qualify for the circuit breaker, and their taxes are going to go up even more than double, because they're going to have to come out of their pocket with that full amount that you have covered in the circuit breaker. So there has been a shift, and most of the increases in our residential property taxes are funding the decreases of our largest property owners, and that shift needs to stop. So I would just implore the committee to contemplate a homeowner's exemption bill as a standalone measure, and not what you're contemplating here. And lastly, with the 10 seconds I have, this will limit fire and police, our capacity to provide public safety for our citizens. You can't hire police officers 90 cents on the dollar, but by limiting the contribution of new growth, new construction into our budget capacity, you're going to limit our capacity to maintain appropriate levels of public safety for our citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time. Next up, we have Brian Stender. Go ahead and introduce yourself, and welcome.
Mr. Chairman, representatives, members of the committee, I'm Brian Stender. I am the Canyon County Assessor. I'm here today asking you to possibly hold this thing up, make some modifications to it potentially. As Mr. Hogeboom has testified just previously, here in my community, my county, we have seen substantial increases in the residential sector versus the commercial, industrial, and agriculture areas in the last several years. This has created a tremendous shift on our friends, family, neighbors, our constituents in the county. I appreciate the inclusion of a $25,000 increase in the homeowner's exemption portion of this. I really would like to see a number closer to $150,000 exemption, and that 55% exemption to allow a little bit more exemption on the bottom end to overcompensate for an adjusting levy rate. It's a lot of numbers. It would be pretty comprehensive to get into in this meeting right here, but a little about Canyon County. You haven't seen what the assessed values are going to do yet this year. We're looking at a 25 to 30% on average increase, kind of have a range between 15 and 40%. I'm kind of a popular guy in the community right now. Every place I go, everybody's asking me what their taxes are going to do. I control their assessed value. I don't have the ultimate say in the end tax bill, but even if the taxing districts remained at zero increases, our residential homeowners would see a substantial increase in their tax bill with the shifting going on. If we increased it to $150,000 homeowners exemption, it wouldn't completely stop the shift to the residential folks. With the size of the increases they're seeing, their tax bill will still go up some. Not as much as if it went at $125,000. The circuit breaker, I appreciate the increase in the circuit breaker. We have a lot of folks. Canyon County's population is not near what Ada County's is, and our demographic, we have almost the same amount of people on circuit breaker as we do as Ada County does. So that portion would help us. The budget component of this, there's a lot of calculations. The more calculations you have, there's a greater chance of errors. Errors could cost taxpayers inadvertently. Those are three of my main concerns of why I would like to see this held up and have possibly a little more modification. I think this was hustled through a little bit. With that, I ask you to hold this for a little bit for possible modification.
Thank you. Representative Necochea for a question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Stender, I'm curious, I think we heard a statewide estimate of maybe 15% of people who are currently on circuit breaker could be removed from the program because the bill would just look at the home value. Do you think there's any way we could address that by adding some sort of consideration of the amount of equity a person has in a home? I guess my question is, if a person doesn't have enough equity in the home and will they not qualify for tax deferral and then have no options?
Go ahead. Your thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Necochea, I haven't seen the final wording of how that's going to come into play. I think there may be concern initially for me is there going to be a statewide median calculation for that threshold of where somebody goes off, or is it going to be a county specific? And then typically what I've seen is you all like to have a third party independent person that sets that bar. So it's not me establishing the threshold. There's some independent, so some checks and balances in that system. I'm not opposed to it at the moment. I would love to see some more numbers behind it once I do see the final valuation, and I think Assessor Statewide would like to participate in that discussion as well.
Thank you. You follow up?
Yes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This might not be the right time frame, but I just saw that from March 2020 to March 2021, so kind of the last 12 months of data we have in Canyon County. I believe your median home prices, or it wouldn't be assessed values, I guess just home prices, went up 42%. So I'm just curious, what level do you think we would have to do in a one-time jump for the homeowners exemption just to kind of hold people where they are, currently from this year? I'm concerned that even just going to 125 isn't going to address, we're just 1 year of growth. So is there a number out there?
So go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Necochea, for my county, Canyon County, the moving it to the median of the last year's sell price from the improved ratio study would result in about $150,000 homeowners exemption cap for this year. And I think that would be close. We looked at using 2019's ratio study. It would have moved it to about 138,000, and that wouldn't realign with the increase in values that we're seeing for 2021's assessment cycle. We'd still see a shift to the residential homeowner sector from the commercial, industrial, and ag sectors.
Thank you. Representative Addis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian, thank you for coming today. And hopefully you can be my lifeline here. We've heard testimony about we need to pay for the services, and the policemen and the firemen are constrained, and there's concern. Did you hear my question? Thanks.
Kinda. The left.
We've had testimony here about paying for services, and the cities need this, and budgets and things like that. And I'm hoping you can give me an answer on, do you know the approximate amount of urban renewal increment in Canyon County that goes to the urban renewal district as opposed to staying in the budget to help paying for some of these services?
Mr. Sander.
Chairman Harris, Representative Addis. I wish I knew that number. It's big. I know it's a large number, and if it was to have expired this cycle, it would have returned property tax relief to everyone in Canyon County, as that increment is sitting there. If it was to go back into the base, it would lower property taxes countywide. I might defer to one of my colleagues that is going to be behind me. He might know off the top of my head with that answer.
If he feels he has the answer.
Would you like him to come up now?
That'd be fine, yes. Come on up and introduce yourself.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Zach Wagner. I'm the Canyon County Controller.
So actually, if you want, we can hang on a second. Are there further questions for Brian first? We'll have Zach come up in any case and testify to us. Representative Nichols.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes.
Sorry about that.
Just a quick question. So in your opinion, with this particular bill, who is going to benefit the most for tax relief?
Mr. Sender.
Chairman Harris, Representative Nichols, thanks for that question. Long term, I believe that the commercial industrial sector would benefit the most from this bill. Currently, in the last 3-4 years, we've seen their overall tax burden be reduced due to the rapidly increasing home prices, and with a capped exemption, throws more of the taxable value into that residential category from the commercial industrial. This bill, I believe it states that over 10 years we'll phase out the personal property. Is that still in this one?
It is not,
That's
but
not-
he can
okay,
he can
so
answer that when he
I
closes.
stand corrected. Currently at 125, that's what's going to shift the values or not shift the values of who's paying. With 125, the residential values are still going up much faster than the commercial industrial. There's some commercial industrial sectors that are going up drastically this year, but not near like the residential overall.
Thank you.
Did I answer that enough?
Seeing no further questions, Representative Wagner.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Mr. Stender, for those areas in the state that have very limited commercial activity, what impact or how does it affect that three-legged stool when we say the shift between residential, agriculture, and commercial? If one or two of those don't exist, then what happens to this bill?
Mr. Stender.
Representative or Chairman Harris, Representative, is it Weber? Okay. That's a great question. It will, if you're in an area with predominantly ag and or timber, that is more of a major factor than the commercial industrial. Those folks will see an increase. One way to look at it, though, is our ag properties are calculated on an income method, but it's by use. So in my county, my farm ground is selling for $8,000 to $10,000 an acre, but it's only assessed for $2,000 an acre. So there is a difference already in the portion of their assessment.
Thank you, Representative Addis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian, one more question. I've got a constituent city in my area that is very nervous about this type of bill because they essentially have no commercial or very little. And it's all rapid residential growth, completely residential. And we talk about shifts and such, but if it's so much more residential anyway, what are we doing to those commercial businesses if we go about a higher proportion than what we're talking about in this bill?
Mr. Stender.
Chairman Harris, Representative Addis, if that happens in those communities, there will be a little bit of increase on that commercial. I can't stand here today and say that there wouldn't be. mathematically, if the budgets remain the same, if everybody asks for the same in their budgets, there would be somewhat of an increase. When we met with you earlier, I did say that maybe that would free up some money in those residential folks' pocket to be able to shop at that business. So sometimes it's a little bit circular.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you for your time. Zach Wagoner? If you have any thoughts on the question that was first posed, go ahead, but go ahead and introduce yourself and who you represent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Zach Wagoner. I represent the Canyon County Clerk's Office. I'm the Canyon County Controller. I've worked in county government almost 19 years. Worked 5 years for the county assessor, appraising residential property. And for the past 14 years, I've worked with the county budget and county finances. So regarding the question relating to urban renewal, in Canyon County, there is roughly an additional $8 million annually in taxes paid that are allocated to urban renewal agencies. Property tax relief is alive and well in Canyon County. Property tax relief is thriving in Canyon County. There are certain classifications of property that are paying significantly less property tax today in Canyon County than they did 4 years ago. Canyon County's largest commercial enterprises, Canyon County's biggest businesses have seen their property tax bills decline, in some cases by 30%. In contrast, owner-occupied homes have seen their property tax bills increase 40%. Oftentimes, these properties are neighbors. These properties pay property tax to the same county. They pay property tax to the same city. They pay property tax to the same school district. And yet one property has seen their tax bill decrease 30%, and their neighbor, an owner-occupied property, has seen their property taxes increase over 40%. The homeowner's exemption is losing its value. As residential house prices skyrocket, the homeowner's exemption, frozen, capped at $100,000, is losing its value. Canyon County is very much concerned with property taxes. We heard the message last year. We did not take any 3% increase. We did not take any new construction increase. We did not take any foregone increase. We didn't freeze our property tax budget. We decreased, we lowered our property tax budget. And in spite of that, a majority of Canyon County homeowners saw their Canyon County property taxes go up. Even after we asked for less dollars, homeowners still saw their property taxes increase. The problem is the capped homeowner's exemption amount. When your house was worth $200,000, your homeowner's exemption is worth $100,000, that's a 50% exemption. Now your $200,000 house is worth $300,000. The exemption has not changed. It's still $100,000, but it's now only 1/3 instead of 1/2 of your market value. For Canyon County homeowners, when you talk about taxable value, which is the value that determines your tax, they're looking at 70 to 80% increases from last year in their taxable value if the homeowner's exemption stays at $100,000.
So I'm going to have you begin to wrap up. 3 minutes is up.
You bet. The $125,000 proposal would help, would benefit those homes that are valued at $250,000 or more. However, if you have a home that's valued at $200,000 or less, you would actually pay more property tax under that proposal without changing the percentage to 55% from 50%.
Thank you. Are there any questions, Representative Nicochea?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Wagner, for your testimony. I'm curious if in your county, you know what 125% of the median assessed value would be.
Mr. Wassinger?
What, 125% of the median?
Yes, correct. So the bill stipulates that if you are not eligible for the circuit breaker come year two, if your home value is above 125%, or if you even can tell me what the median assessed value is in
Mr.
Canyon County.
Wagner, I guess the question is what's the median? What would be 125% of the median, perhaps, if you know that?
I do not know that.
Thank you.
Follow-up?
Go ahead.
Mr. Wagner, is it less than $2 million?
Yes, it's less than $2 million.
Surely. Thank you. Representative Addis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you please tell me approximately how many homes in Canyon County would be subject to the increasing of the tax? I'd kind of like to, of the property tax, even with the increased homeowners exemption, I'd kind of like to size the issue.
Mr. Wagner?
There were over 25,000 homes that paid more property tax.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Representative Nichols.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wagner, my question is this: how many people are you hearing from on a regular basis in regards to their values or their concerns on property tax at this time?
Mr. Wagner?
Mr. Chairman, we are consistently hearing from homeowners, from Idaho families, retired couples, young couples, widows, single mothers, young families. We're hearing from them constantly about their increase in their specific property tax bill.
Thank you. Seeing no more questions, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
We have one more to testify, and that is Francois Cleveland online. And hello, go ahead.
Hi there,
when you're ready.
Mr. Chairman.
We can
Me
hear
all
you.
right?
Yes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Hermes and members of the committee. My name is Francoise Cleveland. I'm the Associate State Director of Advocacy for AARP Idaho. On behalf of our 185,000 Idaho members, I'd like to express some concern over House Bill 389. Property tax continues to be the most burdensome tax for many of our low-income and older residents to absorb. The goal of the circuit breaker property tax relief is to help older Idahoans age in their own homes and communities among family and friends. And this bill, with the proposed eligibility cap of 125% of the median assessed home value by county, could undermine that goal. We supported the expansion of the property tax deferral program to give homeowners options to be able to pay for taxes and stay in their home. However, not everyone is eligible who needs the help. This bill does not take into consideration those who have had severe financial hardships. As we get older, unanticipated expenses are harder to overcome. Not everyone has equity in their home. This bill, as written, will likely make them ineligible for circuit breaker relief and may force them out of their homes and communities at a time when housing is hard to find and even harder to afford. For several years, we've been hearing from our members about the housing crisis in Idaho. In fact, it's probably the most we hear about, of people that contact us. Many of you have been contacted by our constituents as well, concerned about high property taxes, and by many seniors who are struggling to pay the tax to stay in their homes. Now is not the time to increase the difficulty in applying for this relief and reducing the number of people who qualify. Where are these people going to go? We ask for consideration to insert a process to allow homeowners who fall into this category the ability to demonstrate how the deferral program would not work in their situation. This safety net would ensure that those whose intent is only to support an intergenerational transfer of assets on the taxpayer dime would not qualify, but would help those who really need just a little bit of help to age in place. With this, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I ask that you send House Bill 389 to be amended to include this language. With that, will answer any questions.
Thank you for your time. And I'm seeing no questions. Thank you so much. With that, Representative Moyle, will you come and close?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Maybe a few comments on some of the stuff you heard. Let's talk a little bit about Nampa for a minute. Here's a city that went out and said to the fire district, annex our whole city, take over our fire, raise everybody's taxes. Oh, and in the meantime, we're going to keep collecting the same amount of money. That's a shift. It's almost criminal because they didn't even get a vote on whether or not they got annexed into that fire district. Raised everybody's taxes. Didn't want to talk about that, did they? Let's talk about the shift they keep talking about in 2016. Our good representative here always talks about when we capped the homeowner's exemption at $100,000. Do you know what it was that year? Under 90. We raised it 10% because it was falling. Tried to help fix the problem. Now, years later, they're complaining about that. And they are right. It needs to be adjusted. We need to fix it. But come on, guys. There was a reason it was moved up to 100,000 in those days. It does have the concerns for the Nampa fire chief addressed in there. He'll be able to keep the money that they did with this forced annexation. So he's taken care of in this bill. We made sure they're taken care of. I want to talk a little bit about the assessor in Canyon County, Brian. He's a good guy, but let's talk about what's going on. He uses Walmart in every one of his stinking examples. He has the ability, if he chooses, to go after Walmart, not based on what the building's worth, but based on what they make on the income level. He could assess them at the income level. Why doesn't he do that? What about the Costco? Why doesn't he go after them on the income level? Why is he allowing this shift to happen? Is it because it's just easier? Or is it because it's easy to come down here and blame all of you for their inability to control their budgets? Come on, guys. The locals control these. You're better off in Ada County than you are in Canyon County, and they're supposed to be more red than we are. Give me a break. The budgets are out of control. Let's talk a little bit about the homeowner's exemption. Everybody wants to keep focusing on how this is the problem, solves it all with the homeowner's exemption. My friends, some of these districts have nowhere to shift this. You can raise it to $500,000. There's nobody on the other side to pay for it. That's the problem. This is a budget problem. The homeowner's exemption is going to shift to commercial. And you ask the question, who comes out the best? The homeowner does. Not the business. They don't get anything. They're going to pay the bill. Not the farmer next to you. He's going to pay the bill. If you're up in your neck of the wood, it's the guy with the timber. That's a shift, guys. There's no tax relief in here. You remember when the cities were here when we talked about property tax relief at the start of this session. I will never forget this because I was asking questions and I was making our chairman mad at me, rightfully so. But their representative said something that stuck in my head, and I'll paraphrase it. Yes, there's a property tax problem, but it's not our fault. You write the laws. You write the laws. They're not going to stop their bad behavior until you force them to. It's not our budget. It's theirs. It's not us assessing it. It's them. They could go after the income on those guys and not the value of a box. They choose not to. And they come down here and blame you. This is a 25% increase in the homeowner's exemption. This is a start in the right direction. This stops the shift that happens every day when a new house is built next to you and drives up your taxes, good representative. This fixes some of the problems with urban renewals. My friends, there's a lot more to do. This is not the perfect bill. This will help some, but it hurts others. But as we go down this road, it's the best compromise we could get as we went back and forth between the powers to be. You will hear today that IACI doesn't support this. The cities still think that it does away with all the personal property tax. So let me reiterate what it does in this bill. It moves the exemption from $100,000 to $250,000. That's what it does. Doesn't do away with all the personal property tax. It does what we hear our Democrat friends and AARP talk about every year, raise the homeowner's exemption. It does, 25%. It'll help some and not others. There's nobody to shift it to. Sorry, it didn't help you. It raises the circuit breaker, something we hear the Democrats talk about every year. It pays for it out of the general fund. The concern on the 125% of medium takes place next year. And I encourage you to do a little research once we do that. We wait a year so we can figure out how to make it work, because when you see some of these houses, you're going to be ashamed that you're trying to protect them. With that, Mr. Chairman, I will stop because I'm getting on my high horse This is a good bill. It starts us down the direction we need to go. It doesn't get us there, but it gets us in the right direction. I hope you can support it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Go ahead and let's go ahead and allow some questions for the closing, but not normally. So go ahead if you have a question concerning the bill.
I have a question, Representative Moyle. This comes from Twin Falls County Clerk, talking about more about not what's happening, but the timing of it. And now they calculate new construction using the previous year's levy. And her suggestion would be that we use the prior year's levy rate and not new preliminary levy rate. So to calculate new construction, just use the previous year's and then multiply it by whatever reduced percentage after the fact. It has to do with the timing of taxing districts setting their budgets, having their hearings. If that's delayed, then they don't have enough time to get all that done. Can you speak to that?
So in a closing question, I'm gonna allow the questions to be specific to the bill at hand. As much as you want to discuss that and how it relates to the bill at hand, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It does relate to the bill at hand a little bit and was discussed in the discussions, because what this bill does is says that you use the current year's, but you use the past years for operating property. The reason you need, and then you take 90% of that. So there's a 10% reduction in the new construction component. The reason you do that is you need to use the current years because as the values grow, the mill levy is less the next year. You want to use the lower of the two mill levies. When you use the higher of the two mill levies by going back to the previous year, you actually drive up taxes in the existing homeowners. So in places like Canyon and Ada County or Madison County or Kootenai County, where they're growing extensively, by using the previous year's mill levies, you actually drive up the property taxes of existing homes. We want to stop that. So in this bill, we changed that. There was some concern. There were a lot of discussion but as I understood it, as we were making the calls back to some of the assessors, they were confident they could make it work and it'd be okay. There is going to be a learning curve here, though.
Any additional questions? Representative Nichols.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Moyle, you mentioned in your closing about players coming to the table. Can you tell us who some of those players were? Because I just want to find out what the input that was given by different parties.
The cities were at some of the meetings, but all they ever did was say hell no. The counties were at all the meetings. They were very helpful. Farm Bureau was in those meetings. The Association of Realtors were in those meetings. Senators were in those meetings. Other House members were in those meetings. IACI was in those meetings. By the way, they'll oppose the bill, like I said. There were a lot of different people involved. We tried to get as broad a group as we could without getting to the point we couldn't get anything done. There's a point there where you get too many and then it just doesn't work.
Representative Necochea.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since you mentioned it, Representative, could you elaborate on IACI's opposition to this bill? Does it have to do with budget caps impacting development or something else?
So again, I would allow them to sign up, I suppose. I'll allow you to answer that if you'd like to. I hate to have someone speaking for somebody else.
That's okay, Mr. Chairman.
But I'd also have closing questions tied to the content of the bill specifically.
That's
so
okay,
ahead.
Mr. Chairman. I'll tie it to the content of the bill. Again, this has a $250,000 cap. The original concept did away with all of personal property over time. You need to understand what happens with personal property. I don't think everybody understands. But when a business buys a piece of equipment, it goes into the budget, right? And it's charged whatever that mill levy is for that year. But what happens is a piece of equipment depreciates. So it may be worth $1 million this year and $500,000 next year, but the budget doesn't go down. It shifts to everybody else. Eventually, you're going to want to take care of the personal property issue. We've taken care of it for ag. We've got the $100,000 exemption, but eventually I think that the legislature is going to want to get rid of all of it because it has a tendency that part of it can shift to the homeowners. So they end up picking up the bill. IACI wanted the whole enchilada, which would have been better in the long run for taxpayers, but had a lot bigger price tag. And so some of our friends on the second floor and on the Senate side did not want that price tag. It was about $130 million. And I can go into that later after the committee.
Representative Vuti.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Moyle, what percentage of the personal property tax will be picked up by this? I think previously we're up to about 90% of Idaho's businesses. How much further up the remaining 10% have we gotten?
You might have a percentage, you might also have a price tag.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I don't know. The price tag is about $8.1 million. I am not sure what that number will be. You'll pick up now the dentists and some of the doctor's offices that have partial under this proposal. You still don't get to the top end of everybody. It'll allow the utilities to pick up another 250 per county that they're in, so they'll get a benefit too.
Thank you. Are there further closing questions by Representative Gestrin?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to send House Bill 389 to third reading calendar with due pass recommendation.
Thank you. I wouldn't go all the way to the third reading calendar, but Representative Hartgen, you have a question?
I did have a question. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Moyle, on the circuit breaker, and we have the median average. Well, I personally have, my parents are gone, but I know of a house they purchased at $4,000 after World War II. It really never improved. Trust me, still had one bathroom. I think it has two now. That house sold last week for $269,000. It has not changed a bit. If they were still living in it, God forbid, they could not have gotten the circuit breaker. But their actual income had not risen. And to me, property tax is about those people that their fixed income will never let them. I mean, they weren't going to sell their home; they had to live there. And so that's my concern with having a median thing in anything that has to do with the circuit breaker. We may think their houses are worth a lot. It's only if their children are going to sell them after they're gone.
Thank you for the comment.
Mr. Chairman, let me comment on that a little bit too, because you bring up a good point. After they sell it, after they're gone. One of the things that Senator Groh mentioned in this committee is sometimes when we deal with the circuit breaker, we're almost subsidizing somebody's inheritance. And he had some concerns with that. I'd also remind you in this bill, the 125% of median does not happen this year. And the reason we take it out a year is because there may be some concerns we need to address when we know more fully how it will affect. So it does not take effect this year. So everybody will be able to get the circuit breaker this year at a higher number and at a higher income level than it was last year.
Thank you.
Mr.
Representative Hartgen.
Yes, it's kind of a follow-up comment. The median in Twin Falls County is 197,000. So obviously that's the fallacy there in that. And they did take out a reverse mortgage, which is very similar to Representative
deferral.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman and good lady, my father's 86. We had Sunday dinner together. Believe it or not, property taxes came up. They come up every Sunday if I go over.
Representative Nichols.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make a substitute motion.
Are there any more questions? In that case, go ahead and join us. Representative Nichols.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to make a substitute motion to send this to general orders. I still have a lot of concerns. This is quite a packet to dive into. I don't feel that in hearing the discussion that we're going to be doing what we need to do for the homeowners of our state, especially in these areas where we have robust growth taking place. And I'm concerned that we're not going to be giving them the tax relief that they are in dire needs of. I too have elderly parents that live in Canyon County, and they are concerned with what's going to be transpiring with their property taxes because they are on budgets that do not change. And so I feel that we could hopefully do more for the taxpayers of Idaho and keeping them in their homes. As it was brought up that people from very different backgrounds and in different stages of life are calling and concerned about what's going to happen with their mortgages and with the cost that is involved in being able to keep their homes. And so I feel that the $125,000 just doesn't seem like it's going to help where we really need it. And so that's part of my concern, and I want to see that change. So that is my motion. Thank you.
We have a substitute motion to send House Bill 389 to general orders. Is there discussion on the motion? Representative Adams.
Caught me before my light was on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'm going to speak in support of sending this there. There's a lot of talk today about stakeholders and about people at the table that worked so hard on this bill. And I think there is a lot of good stuff in this bill. Not going to lie. I think there's a lot of good stuff. But us as representatives, we are here, in my mind, when it comes to property taxes, we are here to represent the ultimate stakeholders, and that's the homeowners. In my district, $125,000 is not going to cut it. And so I would also like to see the 55% portion with potentially a sunset, so we can provide some relief, come back, address this, but still provide actual property tax relief for homeowners. That's what we got sent here to do.
Representative Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the substitute motions. My concern is we've talked about this all session. Here we are in the 11th hour. We're trying to figure things out. My concern is, are we going to leave without any relief? And that's a big concern of mine. I think that the original motion to send this has been vetted and has the full opportunity to pass. My concern is unless they can, prove otherwise, that the substitute motions will move forward. I'm concerned about that. But
thank you. I'll take a moment as well as the chair to speak to the motions, and I'll speak in favor of the original motion. Ultimate stakeholder is not the homeowner. We have many stakeholders out there living in our communities. About 46% of our property values are homeowners. That's a good chunk. It's not everybody. It's not even the majority. But it's a sizable chunk. It's a plurality, certainly. 28% are non-owner occupied residents. Guess who gets shifted to when we raise the homeowner's exemption? The homeowner who owns a home, who pays property tax and writes a check and sees the value of that, gets upset. The poor renter, where's the relief here? Gets shifted all to the renter. Commercial is about 22%. So the lion's share of this shifts to the renters. Two neighbors, side by side, same house. One owns a home, values are going up. Lucky them. Oh, you got to pay taxes. Sorry. That's usually what happens when you have income sometimes. The neighbor, renter, doesn't own the home, doesn't have 125% exemption. And now we do a shift onto them. Are they both grandparents, both on a fixed income, both struggling? You look at the numbers, and it turns out that homeowners pay about 1%, just over 1% of their value in property taxes. Guess how much commercial pays in property taxes? Just over 1%. Isn't that amazing? Everyone's paying their fair share, 1%. Yeah, we want to shift it to renters. I have a problem with that. We have homeowner exemption topics that want to shift. Sometimes they're the most vulnerable and don't want to bend the curve. If we're going to, and when I mean bend the curve, I'm talking about reducing the increases that property taxing districts gather year over year. So this bill bends the curve, raises the homeowner exemption, adjusts the circuit breaker, takes a bite at personal property tax, and it's a good bill. So I support the original motion. Is there other discussion? Representative Weber?
Mr. Chairman, let me, could you maybe walk us through if the amended, if we send this back to general orders, what's the timeline if that was to be considered?
Thank you. Thank you for asking that. And in my opinion, it kills the bill. If the substitute motion passes, I believe it kills the bill. Representative Harkin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will support the original motion, not because I think that it's the best bill. Obviously, I have an issue with the circuit breaker, But by raising the exemption even more, I think it falls to our ag industry in my area. And that's not fair, and I'll hear about that. But I will support the original bill. But I will also reserve my right to talk to my people and change my vote on the floor.
Thank you. Representative Kaufman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too will support the original motion, but I still have a problem with the timing of it, because if you're moving when you can get the amount that you can levy, if you're a local taxing district, from June to August, and you have a public hearing and you have to do your budget before the public hearing in August, sometimes August, September, I don't think it gives you enough time. I think we could do better on the timing of that. So
Thank you. I wonder if the timing is affected, the idea of using a preliminary levy rate. So they intend to use a preliminary levy rate for new construction as opposed to last year's, before the official one is calculated because of the timing issue. So they will take a stab at the levy rate for the current year, use that for new construction to avoid using last year's, and then move forward to prepare the completed levy rate. Any comments on that, Representative Moyle? Good. Thank you. Representative Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to briefly clarify something. So when I talked about the homeowners being the primary intent, I appreciate what you said. Yes, there are many stakeholders. But I have a question for you, Mr. Chairman, if that's possible.
It's possible.
Okay.
He may not stand.
Before I say that, this we'll call it an RS, because that's all it ever became.
This is House Bill 398, 389.
Yes, I'm sorry, not this. The RS that Representative
So we have a dozen RSs like that?
Yes.
We're not going to be discussing a dozen different RSs here. Is that a context of today?
Yes, this is in context to today, because the reason for the substitute motion and the intent that we're trying to do here is to bring forward some legislation that did not get heard,
Sorry, that'll be out of
to get
order.
substituted into the bill that is currently being discussed.
That's out of order. There could be a number of reasons we will go to the amending order. There could be any number of amendments. As I said, there were a dozen different approaches to homeowners exemption, that being one of them, not the only one.
Of course.
And others would certainly have reasons and make attempts to make adjustments to it.
Okay, well then I have a question for
So
you, Mr.
we won't
Chairman, if
discuss
that's
any
all right.
particular RS or draft that has come along in the last year or two or this session.
Well, then I'll just talk about an idea then.
Talk about the substitute motion or the original motion.
Okay.
That's what's before us.
The substitute motion, which I am supporting, and which I understand there is a lot of concern that this bill, as the chairman said, may be killed if it goes to general orders. My thoughts are this. We need actual property tax relief. That's what they've been asking, what our citizens have been asking for all year. The way I read this bill, whether it passes and has a chance to pass or it doesn't, the way I read it, it doesn't give property tax relief to homeowners. You can say it's a 25% increase, but when your property values have increased by 170%, that doesn't really help much. So my question for you, Mr. Chairman, is you had mentioned that you believe that if this goes to general orders, that it will effectively kill the bill. And my question to you is, what makes you have that presumption?
It's only my opinion.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there others? Is there more discussion on the motion? Representative Conowitz.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Conowitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to support the original motion, but I want to reserve my right on the floor.
Very good. Thank you. Representative Moyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that the good representative doesn't know what the bill does. I don't think he's read it. Homeowners get an advantage from $125,000 in 25% increase. They get the advantage of an 8% cap. That's your area. That will help, by the way. You kill this bill, you do your thing, they lose. It takes 90% of the new construction. Oh, there you go. So when they build a new house next to you, you don't get the bill like you're getting it now. The same with the little old lady or my father. They don't get the bill like they're getting it now. It fixes that. Tax relief. 80% of the URD. Oh, that's right. Canyon County has a real big one going on over there, don't they? Tax relief to Canyon County, your county. Oh, you guys drive me crazy. And last but not least, the changing of the qualifications in regards to new construction. That is a huge one. 20% in Canyon County. Language that actually came from the good assessor over there as he addressed some of the concerns that he had that are causing some of the increase in Canyon County. This bill cuts taxes for homeowners. Don't say it doesn't.
And perhaps more in Canyon County than other counties in Idaho.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
I respond. Thank you. I would like the good representative to know that I have read the bill, even though I just got to see it for the first time today. I did take the time to read all of the bill because that's what we're supposed to do. We just have a difference of opinion on this. I appreciate that. That's what we're here for, right? Many opinions, but to assume that I don't know what I'm talking about is flat out wrong.
Point taken. Thank you. Is there further discussion on the motion? Representative Nicochea.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm struggling because there are some things in this bill that I like and I've been asking for, but it's coming in a package that has a lot of things that are also really problematic, and that send a message that's not the message I want to send. We're dedicating $8 million in general funds. We found that money to pay for the increase on the exemption that businesses will benefit from on their personal property tax. That's an increase of 250% of what that exemption was. When it comes to the circuit breaker, we're only going to expand access by a couple million, and we're going to pay for that by kicking people off the program. And I think we need a more surgical approach to that. Now, if you have a $2 million home and are just barely income eligible for the circuit breaker, then I think we can talk about that. I think 125% of the median, and you have a reverse mortgage, maybe you don't have any equity in the home, maybe the tax deferral program is not going to be an option for you, then we're just leaving these people, hanging out to dry because they bought a house a long time ago and the value went up around them. The homeowners exemption, we're doing something very modest compared to what we're doing with the personal property tax exemption, increasing it by 25%. That's, in the reality we're in, that doesn't even cushion homeowners in our fast-growing counties from 1 year of growth when we're talking about median values growing by 27%, 42%. So if that were the bill, if that were the only piece of the bill and that were in front of me, I would support it because it's something, but it shows I don't think it demonstrates our good priorities, that we're prioritizing our homeowners. We talk about renters. I would love to find something to help renters, help our lower income Idahoans. I have proposed bills to try to help our lower income homeowners and renters, but I also don't want to pass a bill that makes it harder for renters to ever become homeowners because property taxes are so high. And then finally, I think we should have the budget cap discussion in a separate bill. We saw this idea, we saw them go round and around on the Senate side. We saw cities halt development approvals because they were worried about their ability to provide adequate services with these kinds of caps. And so that's just going to further exacerbate our housing crisis if we can't build the homes that people need in this valley. So I'm conflicted, but I am inclined to support the substitute motion. It was mentioned that time is running out and we have to do something. Well, we've kind of forced ourselves into that position, but we're also really nimble. We printed this at noon today, and now we're having a hearing on it. So we've proved ourselves to be nimble. I think we can come up with something better than this for Idaho's property taxpayers.
Thank you. Are there further comments, Representative Nichols?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, so I really believe that the shift has already happened with our homeowners, and I think that's part of the problem that we have going on currently. And like the good representative just stated, we can do so much in such a short amount of time. If we want something to happen, we can do it. There are a lot of good parts that I do like about this proposal, but there are some things that I really do think need to be in there that will make a difference for the taxpayers of Idaho in general. Again, changing that homeowners exemption to the $150,000. I think that is needed. And so I think that if we really wanted to, we could go back to the drawing board briefly. I mean, we're going to be taking a break here anyway, and do some redrafting and get something that will be even stronger and better for the taxpayers of Idaho.
Thank you. Further comments? Further discussion? Seeing none. The motion is to send House Bill 389 to general orders. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. Nay. The nays have it. The motion fails. Original motion is to send House Bill 389 to the floor with a due pass recommendation. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Nay. Motion carries. Thank you.